John chapter 6, verses 1 to 15. After this, Jesus went to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, which is the Sea of Tiberias. And a multitude followed him, because they saw the signs he did on those who were sick. Jesus went up on the mountain, and there sat down with his disciples. Now the Passover, the feast of the Judeans, was at hand. Actually, that's verses 1 through 4, ladies and gentlemen. Who, what, where, when, and why? This first introductory section describes the presence of Jesus, the disciples, and the multitude on the mountain, on the other side of the Sea of Galilee, as Passover, the feast of the Judeans, approaches. The multitude follows Jesus because the people have seen the signs he did on the sick. The Johannine Jesus ascends an unnamed mountain and seats himself there with his disciples. The use of the definite article, the mountain, estouros, in Greek, may be a first hint from John that Jesus is adopting a position parallel to Moses, who received the Torah on the mountain. Does that make sense? Wasn't he just talking about Moses in verse 5 with the people accusing him? It's not I who accuse you, it is Moses who accuses you, in whom you have set your hope. And then he goes and does actions that are just like Moses. Big multitude follows him through a wilderness, goes up to a mountain, right? Looking closely at the narrative, the following shape emerges. A, verses 1 through 4, gives us the setting, the scene, and the characters. B, verses 5 through 9, a problem is presented by Jesus that cannot be solved by his disciples. C, verses 10 to 13, a wonder takes place, that is a sign in John, through the words and actions of Jesus. D, verses 14 to 15, we have the aftermath of the wonder. This expression, to the other side, peron, creates problems. The other side of where? To the other side may simply indicate a given place at the north end of the lake, the Sea of Galilee. John typically introduces significant interactions of Jesus with an accurate designation of the time and place of the event. Here the time is when the Judean feast of Passover was near. The place is the other side of the Sea of Galilee, also known as the Sea of Tiberias, the emperor. Specifically, the location was the mountain. The mountain in Mediterranean culture was a height outside inhabited or cultivated or humanized space, which means outside a city, outside a village, outside a town. A mountaintop was a well-attested place for communing with God or the gods. This is true in the Old Testament, right? In Sinai or Horeb. Since the areas outside towns and outside villages were considered chaotic and uncontrolled by humans, however, they were believed to be inhabited by various powerful spirits and demons. In antiquity, folks, meals did not normally take place on mountains. People did not picnic or go on to do recreational swimming or go mountain climbing like the Mountain Dew commercial in the first century Mediterranean world. In the wild, proper care could not be taken in the preparation of food or in meeting the other necessities of ritual purity. The fact that purchasing food is discussed in the story is an indication that the people in the multitude are some distance from kin from whom they would normally seek food when away from home for a time. Differently than the two Cana wonders, that we hear in John, which are very typical Johannine sign stories. Here, in this story in John, we are given the traditional form of an ancient wonder story. It's very similar to the wonder stories that appear in the Synoptics in form and style. Nevertheless, a unique Johannine point of view has been insinuated into the telling of this traditional wonder story. John chapter 6, verses 5 to 9, lifting up his eyes then and seeing that a multitude was coming to him, Jesus said to Philip, "How are we to buy bread so that these people may eat?" This he said to test him, for he himself knew what he would do. Philip answered him, 200 denarii would not buy enough bread for each of them to get a little. One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, "There is a boy here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. But what are they among so many?" The problem. Lifting up his eyes, the Johannine Jesus sees a throng, a multitude coming to him. And he speaks to one of his disciples, Philip, the one we met way back in John chapter 1, verse 43. Remember that? Yes? Mark chapter 6, verse 37, Jesus said to them in reply, this is the Markan version, "Give them some food yourselves." But they said to him, "How are we to buy 200 days' wages worth of food and give it to them to eat?" Mark chapter 8, verse 4. His disciples answered him, "Where can anyone get enough bread to satisfy them here in this deserted place?" Matthew chapter 15, verse 32 to 33. Jesus summoned his disciples and said, "My heart is moved with pity for the crowd, for they have been with me now for 3 days and have nothing to eat. I do not want to send them away hungry, for fear they may collapse on the way." Notice, on the way. What did early followers of Jesus call themselves? Followers of the way. Why do we have to eat on the way? We may collapse if we don't have food. What's the food we eat along the way? The early Jesus groups, what was the food that they ate? This story has, in all its forms, massive Eucharistic overtones. Do you think that that's stage 1 or stage 3 in the various communities? Stage 3. The disciples said to him, "Where could we ever get enough bread in this deserted place to satisfy such a crowd?" Unlike Jesus in the Synoptic Gospels, the Johannine Jesus takes the initiative, indicating his concern that the people be fed. A question that Moses asked of Yahweh in the desert is recalled. Numbers chapter 11, verse 13. "Where am I to get the meat to give all these people?" Now it's very interesting in Hebrew and Aramaic. The same word for bread is the word for meat and all food, lachem. You know, there's a place called the house of meat. It also means the house of bread. It also means the house of food. Beit Lachem. You remember that place? Yet the Johannine Jesus concern is rhetorical. In a crucial aside, the narrator informs the audience that Jesus knew what he would do. The question of the Johannine Jesus, how are we to buy bread so that these people may eat, tests the loyalty of his disciples. How well did they do on the test? Good or
Poor.
Evelyn?
If they only had
Poor.
200 dinars, they would be an artist. But if they didn't,
Are these guys elites? Do they have that expendable income, surplus income? No way. So the only chance they have of being anywhere near related to a great broker is an alternate reality. Because in consensual reality, they got two things, Jack and Squat. And Jack just left town. Consider the concept triangle. Isn't it true that before you can have the concept or idea of triangle, you first have to have grasped what an angle is? Doesn't angle logically come before triangle? And in the same way, this applies to miracles. A miracle is a violation of the physical laws governing the universe. But before you can understand what miracles are, don't you have to logically first have a concept of physical laws governing the universe? Don't you have to have a belief in a set of laws governing the natural order? If you don't have that, can you have miracle? Different works in the Old Testament speak of marvels and marvelous things and wonders, but we should never translate the Hebrew word wonder or marvel into miracle. I want you to consider a 21st century Israeli mom, delighted at her collegian daughter's fine grades at the university. When she exclaims in Hebrew, "Marvelous!" she is not declaring, "Wow, what a violation of the laws of nature. My dumb as dirt daughter did pretty well. She did an absurdity." No, she's not saying that. She is saying, "Marvelous! My very capable daughter studied hard, prepared very well, and applied herself, and look at this marvel that came about." Marvels and wonders. This is how God's deeds, God's acts, God's works are described in the Hebrew Bible. Not miracles, violations of the laws of the universe. They don't have a concept of laws governing the universe. I mean the biblical authors and the biblical characters. And there's no interventions in history. That's not how they think. Intervening implies that God is sometimes absent to the world. Is that how our biblical ancestors in the faith conceive of God? Sometimes the absent one? No. God is never the absent one. God is always the present one in the Bible. So no interventions and no miracles, wonders, marvels. And this is how Jesus' deeds are described in the New Testament. The Synoptic Gospels, Mark, Matthew, and Luke, say that Jesus did mighty deeds. The fourth Gospel, John, says Jesus did signs and works, but no miracles. There are no miracles in the Bible, if by miracles we mean post-Enlightenment violations of physical laws, or the laws of nature, or scientific laws. Even the most current studies attempting to understand the Jesus of history generally take little cognizance of the fact that he became incarnate in the ancient Mediterranean world. Anthropologists who specialize in this region at its literary records point out that approximately 90% of world cultures and 80% of circum-Mediterranean cultures readily experience altered states of consciousness. From the biblical record alone, which is included in the Anthropological Databank, it is evident that the people of this ancient culture were certainly among that 80%. Studies of Moroccan Jews in Israel are particularly enlightening in this regard. When they were forcibly repatriated to Israel in the 1950s and 1960s, the Moroccan Jews carried with them not only their personal belongings, but their beliefs, values, and traditions. They revitalized their practices and attached them to new sites and new saints to substitute for those they left behind. One of these takes place at the tomb of Rabbi Shimeon Bar Yochai at Meren Nerzaved. On the anniversary of his death, these devotees make a pilgrimage to his tomb, celebrate a picnic-like feast in the surrounding countryside, and expect to see him in a dream. And they do. The dream pattern typically has 4 elements, common in altered state of consciousness experiences, or ASC experiences for short. 1. Those experiencing the vision are initially frightened. And 2. Do not recognize the figure appearing before them. 3. The figure appearing before them offers calming assurance. Do not be afraid. And 4. Identifies herself or himself. It is I. Then the figure offers information. Maybe it's clarification of identity, or the granting of a favor, for example, healing or a healing strategy. The purpose of the experience is to illuminate a puzzle in life, or to suggest or approve a line of conduct. Notice that this is not a literary form. It is a pattern of human experience constructed by the culture rather than by someone's creative imagination. Jesus and those who knew him were quite familiar with and adept at experiences of alternate reality. Accounts of Jesus' baptism, transfiguration, walking on the Sea of Galilee, and post-death or post-resurrection appearances readily fit into the common Mediterranean cultural experiences of altered states of consciousness, even when the experience that is reported is so in an incomplete or selective manner. Aside from dreams and angelic appearances featured prominently in the infancy narratives of Matthew and Luke, the synoptics report 5 main incidents of such visions and/or appearances in the career of Jesus. The dunking of Jesus, also called his baptism, an experience in altered reality. The testing of Jesus, also called the temptation of Jesus, an experience in altered states of consciousness. Of course, walking on the sea stories, which we have been dealing with at some length in these presentations, another ASC experience. The transfiguration accounts of Jesus, another example of Jesus in altered reality. And of course, the resurrection appearances, also ASC experiences that we will deal with soon. So the only chance they have of being anywhere near related to a great broker is an alternate reality. Because in consensual reality, they got 2 things, Jack and Squat. And Jack just left town. Philip's response is limited to the material bread that one would need to feed such a multitude. John 6, verse 7. Philip answered him, 200 denarii would not be 200 days' wages would not buy enough for a manual laborer like us. Would not buy enough bread for each of them to get a little. These are peasants. Recall that the disciples were present with Jesus. You all remember they were present with Jesus back in Samaria. They come see him talking to the Samaritan woman. You remember that? And they're shocked. Oh my God, he's with a Samaritan woman and she walks away and they go, eat something. Rabbi, eat something. And he goes, I have food to eat about which you do not know. And they're like, he hasn't eaten anything, has he? Like, has the Samaritan woman brought him food? That would be horrific. So you recall, back in Samaria, Jesus spoke about true nourishment that he had from his unconditional acceptance of the will of the one who has sent him, the patron Israel, back in John chapter 4, verses 32 to 34. You all recall that? Philip appears to have not learned from that encounter. He has not progressed from that. He's still back in Samaria like, huh? He doesn't get it. John chapter 6, verses 8 to 9. One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, there is a boy here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. But what are they to so many? Let's see if Andrew's done any better. What do you think? Has Andrew progressed from the first days? Remember, he was with the unnamed disciple. He was the first of the 2 disciples to follow Jesus. John the Dunker said, go follow him. Remember that? Andrew appears to have not understood Jesus when he spoke to the disciples about nourishment back in Samaria either. Andrew joins Philip in pointing to the paucity of their supplies. A boy in the crowd has 2 fish and 5 barley loaves. Meaning, he's not saying, yeah, everything's great. He's saying Hakuna Matata in its proper expression. You know, Hakuna Matata means really, in Ugandan, it means it can't get any worse. That's what it really means. It doesn't mean it means no worries because we're done for. That's what it really means. It hasn't rained in 40 days, Hakuna Matata. 70% of us have AIDS, Hakuna Matata. Here comes Boko Haram, Hakuna Matata. Yeah. Andrew and Philip have been with Jesus from the very beginning, right, of the Jesus movement. Chapter 1, the origins. And to be honest, because this is John, that means in John, they've been with him from the first days of the Johannine Anti-Society, correct? Yes? But they have not learned from their master's attempt to draw them beyond the limitations of their expectations. Wow, is this an important lesson for Catholics today? In this case, they can't go away and expand from the need for a large sum of money to buy sufficient quantities of bread. They have not learned this lesson at the end of chapter 1 that Jesus told Nathanael. Jesus answered, "Do you believe because I told you that I saw you under the fig tree? You will see greater things than these." And he said to him, "Amen, amen, I say to you, you will see sky vault opened, and the angels of God ascending and descending upon the sky vault man." Nevertheless, the raw material for the events to follow have been provided: the loaves and the fish. The audience of John waits for Jesus' action as he himself knew what he would do in verse 6b.